What if I told you that Lucifer was never just a fallen angel? What if, in the unimaginable ages before Adam was ever formed from dust, he was the emperor of a vast and glittering cosmic trade empire, a civilization of celestial beings that was ultimately judged and erased from our history? The Bible you hold in your hands gives you only the final act of his rebellion. It tells you he fell. It tells you he was cast down. But it remains hauntingly silent on what he fell from. The ancient texts, the forbidden scrolls that were deemed too dangerous for the canon, they do not remain silent. They preserve the business records of his lost kingdom. For centuries, we have been taught a simplified story of good versus evil, a narrative that begins with a serpent in a garden. But most people, seekers like you, have always sensed that this could not be the whole story. The sheer scale and complexity of evil in our world points to an origin story that is far grander, more organized, and infinitely more terrifying. You are here because you know there is something deeper waiting, and you are right. The journey we are about to embark upon will forever change the way you understand the nature of the adversary. We will decode the cryptic verses in Ezekiel and Isaiah that speak not of a simple angel, but of a merchant prince whose trade was in glory and whose pride led to a hostile takeover attempt of cosmic proportions. This is the hidden truth of the civilization before Adam, and once you see it, the familiar story of Genesis will reveal itself not as the beginning, but as the aftermath. Before we open these lost ledgers, be sure that you are subscribed with notifications enabled. The Corporation of Darkness is still in business, and this is the story of its founding. To comprehend the sheer scale of Lucifer's empire, we must first abandon our human-centric view of the universe and attempt to picture the cosmos as it was in that primordial age. This was not the empty, silent void that modern science often portrays. It was a universe already ancient, already teeming with life, and structured with a breathtaking complexity that would dwarf any human empire. The scriptures speak of multiple heavens, which the ancient mind understood not as layers of clouds, but as distinct dimensions or realms of existence, each with its own inhabitants, its own laws of physics, and its own unique splendor. Imagine a network of interconnected kingdoms, a celestial tapestry woven from light and sound. In this ancient cosmos, there were established pathways between these realms, cosmic highways through which angelic beings traveled. There were celestial cities, great centers of administration and learning, and seats of government for the various orders of angels, the thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers that the Apostle Paul would later reference. This was not a chaotic, unformed universe. It was a civilization. It had structure, it had government, and as we shall see, it had a vibrant and complex economy. The stage for our story is not a barren planet, but a bustling, ancient universe. A kingdom of kingdoms, all operating in what was, for a time, a state of perfect, unshakable harmony. The spiritual atmosphere of that primordial age was one of perfect, crystalline clarity. Truth was not a concept to be debated. It was the very air that all celestial beings breathed. There were no shadows of doubt, no gray areas of interpretation. The will of the Creator was not a distant decree, but a constant, resonant frequency that permeated every realm, holding all things in their appointed place. The primary law of this universe, the foundational principle upon which all reality was built, was alignment. Every action, every thought, and every expression was measured by a single, unwavering standard. Did it bring glory back to the eternal source? In that era, worship was not an activity, it was the very physics of existence. The trade that flowed between the celestial realms was this constant, joyful exchange of glory and blessing. The lower realms offered up their unique praise, their specific wonder, and in return, the higher realms poured down an ever-increasing measure of light, life, and divine energy. It was a perfect, self-sustaining economy of grace, a cosmic circulatory system with the throne of God as its beating heart. The sky was not silent. It was a symphony, and every being, from the mightiest seraph to the smallest celestial servant, knew its part and sang it in flawless harmony. There was no corruption because there was no competing agenda. The spiritual crisis that would later shatter this harmony had not yet been conceived, because the very idea of a will separate from the creators was, in that perfect state, a logical impossibility. In the very heart of this perfect, harmonious cosmos, one being was created with a splendor that surpassed all others. He was not born into darkness. He was fashioned from the very essence of light, the apex of God's creative artistry. We know him by the name Lucifer, the light-bearer, but the prophet Ezekiel gives him a title far more specific and profound: the anointed cherub who covers. He was not just another angel in the celestial choir. He was a guardian of the very throne of God, a living sanctuary whose wings overshadowed the epicenter of all creation. The description of his being in Ezekiel chapter 28 is a portrait of unparalleled perfection. You were the seal of perfection, God says of him, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. His form was adorned with every precious stone, as if the entire mineral glory of creation had been woven into his very fabric. He did not just exist, he radiated. He was blameless in his ways from the day he was created. He walked back and forth in the midst of the stones of fire, a phrase that suggests an intimacy with the very core of God's unapproachable holiness that was granted to no other. He was not just a servant, he was a masterpiece, a testament to the infinite creativity of his Maker. But in that perfection, in that flawless beauty and unmatched wisdom, a shadow began to form. It was not a flaw in his design, but a potential that existed within the freedom he was given. He began to look at the glory that flowed through him and mistook it for a glory that originated from him. He walked among the splendor of the heavenly court, but in his heart a vast and lonely desert began to form, a place where the admiration of others was no longer enough to quench a growing thirst for self-admiration. A seed of pride, so subtle at first as to be indistinguishable from the light itself, began to take root in the heart of the most glorious being in all the universe. The conflict that was brewing within Lucifer was not a rivalry with another angel, for he had no equal among the created beings. His struggle was not against Michael or any other archangel who might challenge his position. His true and ultimate adversary was far more fundamental, far more powerful. The opposing force he chose to confront was the very system of reality in which he existed. It was the unshakable, foundational principle of the cosmos, the absolute sovereignty of God. In the divine economy, as we have seen, all glory, all worship, all authority flowed in one direction, upward, toward the throne of the Creator. This was not an arbitrary rule enforced by a celestial tyrant. It was the very physics of spiritual life, the law that maintained the harmony and stability of all the realms. Every being, no matter how glorious, was created as a reflection, a vessel designed to receive the infinite light of God and reflect it back to its source with an added note of unique praise and gratitude. This was the great cosmic current of life. But Lucifer, in the perfection of his wisdom and the splendor of his beauty, began to experience a profound and dangerous shift in perception. He started to see the glory that flowed through him and mistook it for a glory that originated from him. The system that required all worship to be directed to the center became, in his eyes, an obstacle to his own self-realization, a limitation on his own perceived divinity. The unalterable law that he was a creature, a masterpiece of the Creator, began to feel less like an honor and more like an injustice. This is the nature of the highest form of pride. It does not seek to destroy, it seeks to become a rival center. Lucifer did not yet hate God. He simply began to believe that he was worthy of the same status. The opposing force, therefore, was not a personal enemy, but a metaphysical principle. The principle that there could only be one source of all glory, one uncreated center of all worship. And it was this foundational truth, this unalterable fact of his own createdness, that the most perfect being in all of creation began to resent, to question, and finally to wage war against. He was not just breaking a rule, he was attempting to rewrite the very laws of spiritual physics. The moment of open rebellion was not a loud, violent explosion, but a quiet, internal declaration. It was a shift in will, a pivot of the heart that echoed through the cosmos with the force of a shattering star. This was not a sudden impulse. It was the culmination of a long period of self-contemplation, a slow turning away from the source of his light toward the brilliance of his own reflection. The prophet Isaiah, in chapter 14, was given a glimpse into this cosmic treason, preserving for all time the 5 defiant whispers that became the founding manifesto of this new treasonous kingdom. "I will ascend into heaven," he declared. Let us analyze this first statement. It is not a declaration of physical movement, but of spiritual ambition. He was already a being of the heavens, dwelling in the highest realms. What he sought was a higher station, a throne above the thrones of his peers. It was a rejection of his appointed place in the divine order. "I will exalt my throne above the stars of God," he continued. The stars of God in ancient Hebrew cosmology were often understood to be the other high-ranking angelic beings, the princes of the celestial court. This was a direct challenge to his fellow rulers, a declaration that he would no longer be a peer among them, but their sovereign. "I will also sit on the mount of the congregation in the farthest sides of the north," he proclaimed. According to the text, this is a direct claim to the very seat of divine government, the cosmic Mount Zion where the heavenly council convened. He was attempting to seize the center of all legislative and executive power in the universe. "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds," he vowed, a statement of his intent to surpass the known and established limits of all created beings, to breach the veil that separated even the highest angels from the uncreated glory of the Almighty. And then came the final fatal declaration, the whisper that sealed his doom and ignited the first cosmic war. "I will be like the Most High." He did not say, "I will be the Most High." He knew he could not usurp the uncreated essence of God, but he believed he could replicate his authority, his glory, and his position of worship. He sought to become a co-equal, a rival center of power, an alternative God. In that moment of ultimate pride, his cosmic trade empire pivoted. It was no longer an enterprise of exchanging glory. It became a corporation dedicated to acquiring it for himself. The rebellion had officially begun. Lucifer's rebellion was not a spontaneous, emotional outburst. It was a calculated, strategic, and political campaign. Having made the internal decision to establish a rival throne, he did not immediately launch a frontal assault. Instead, he embarked on what can only be described as a celestial lobbying effort, a wilderness journey through the corridors of heaven to consolidate power and gather allies to his cause. He was a master politician, and his platform was seductive. He did not approach the other angelic beings with a message of open treason. He approached them with the language of liberation, of self-actualization. He used his unparalleled wisdom not to illuminate the truth of God, but to twist it. To the lower orders of angels, he may have whispered of injustice, of a rigid hierarchy that stifled their potential. To the princes and powers, his peers, he likely spoke of a new order, a partnership of co-equals, a universe where glory was not just reflected, but generated and shared among the worthy. The text in Ezekiel gives us a critical clue to his methods. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence. This trading was not in physical goods. It was a trade in ideas, in loyalties, in promises of promotion within his new proposed corporate structure. He was moving through the realms of heaven, making deals, forging alliances, and slowly, insidiously, creating a faction, a shadow government that was loyal not to the throne of God, but to him. This was his wilderness journey. It was a period of testing, not for him, but for the entire angelic host. Each being was faced with a choice: to remain in the economy of grace, where their value came from their relationship to the Creator, or to join the new economy of merit, where their value would be determined by their position in Lucifer's new hierarchy. He offered them not rebellion, but a career path. And the scripture tells us that his campaign was terrifyingly successful. He convinced a third of the stars of heaven to follow him, a testament to his charisma and the seductive power of his message of self-deification. The celestial campaign of persuasion was complete. The alliances had been forged, the promises made. A third of the heavenly host had secretly shifted their allegiance, their hearts now resonating not with the frequency of worship, but with the low hum of rebellion. And then a terrible and profound silence fell upon the heavens. It was the calm before the storm, a moment of cosmic tension so thick that the very fabric of reality seemed to hold its breath. On the surface, the rituals of heaven continued. The choirs of the faithful still sang. The rivers of light still flowed. The celestial bodies still moved in their appointed courses. To an outside observer, nothing had changed. The divine order appeared as unshakable as it had for eternity. But for those with the spiritual sensitivity to perceive it, the harmony was gone. The great symphony of creation now had a silent section, a vast and growing emptiness, where a third of the orchestra had laid down their instruments. This was not a peaceful silence. It was the charged, heavy quiet of a courtroom just before the verdict is read. It was the stillness of two armies arrayed on a battlefield, watching each other across a valley of decision, each waiting for the first trumpet to sound. Lucifer had played his hand. He had gathered his forces. He had established his shadow government. Now he waited. He was about to make his final move, to openly challenge the authority of the Most High, and the entire universe paused, suspended in a moment of terrifying anticipation. The war was no longer a possibility, it was an inevitability. The heavens were about to be torn asunder. The silence was finally shattered not by a whisper, but by a declaration of open war. The 12th chapter of the Book of Revelation pulls back the veil on this cataclysmic event, describing a battle not of flesh and blood, but of cosmic authority and divine power. And war broke out in heaven, the text declares. This was not a small skirmish. It was a civil war that threatened to rip the very fabric of the celestial realm. On one side stood Michael, the archangel, and the armies of heaven who had remained loyal to the throne. The name Michael, which means "who is like God," was not just his name, it was his battle cry, a direct refutation of Lucifer's claim to be like the Most High. He did not fight in his own strength, but as the enforcer of God's unshakable authority. His power was derived entirely from his perfect alignment with the will of the Creator. On the other side stood the great dragon, the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, and his angels. Lucifer, the light-bearer, had now fully embraced his new identity as the adversary. He fought with the fury of a being who had everything to gain and a universe to lose. This was the moment his cosmic trade empire made its hostile takeover bid. The battle that raged was a conflagration of light and shadow, of truth and deception. It was a war fought not with swords of steel, but with wills of fire. The text does not give us the details of the combat, but the outcome is swift and decisive. The dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. Lucifer's rebellion, for all its cunning and for all the power he had amassed, was crushed. He had miscalculated. He had believed that the power he possessed was his own, but in the final confrontation, he discovered that the reflected light of a creature, no matter how brilliant, is no match for the uncreated fire of the source. The war in heaven was over. The takeover had failed. But the consequences of that failure were about to spill over into a new and vulnerable realm. The roar of celestial battle faded, replaced by a profound and solemn silence. The war was over, the rebellion crushed. But the sentence for this cosmic treason was not annihilation, it was expulsion. The great dragon, the ancient serpent, was seized, and along with the third of the stars who had followed him, he was cast out of heaven. This was not a gentle relocation. It was a violent gravitational fall from the highest realms of light and order into the lower, unformed dimensions of the physical cosmos. Jesus himself, in the Gospel of Luke, would later give his disciples a glimpse of this moment, stating, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." This was not a slow descent. It was an instantaneous, cataclysmic fall, a being of immense power being hurled through the dimensions at an unimaginable speed. He was stripped of his position as the anointed cherub. His access to the heavenly throne room was permanently revoked. His place was found no more. He was not, however, cast into a void. He was cast down to the earth, and he did not come alone. He brought his entire corporate structure with him, his hierarchy of thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. His kingdom had not been destroyed, it had been relocated. His cosmic trade empire, once headquartered in the heavens, had now set up a new base of operations in a lower realm, and the planet that would one day be prepared for Adam became, in that moment, the occupied territory of a defeated but still immensely powerful fallen king. The silence that followed his expulsion was the silence of a new and terrible reality. The war in heaven had ended. but the war for Earth was just beginning. The expulsion of Lucifer and his legions was not a clean, sterile transfer. It was a cosmic impact event of unimaginable violence, and the primordial Earth became the point of impact. The fall, like lightning, was not just a poetic metaphor. It was the cause of the first great cataclysm, the divine judgment that left the original creation in a state of utter ruin. The first ripples of Lucifer's fall were a tidal wave of destruction that unmade a world. This is the event that bridges the gap between the perfect world that God created in the beginning and the chaotic, waterlogged wasteland of Genesis 1-2. The judgment that was enacted upon Lucifer's rebellion was not confined to the spiritual realm. It had a direct and catastrophic physical consequence. The primordial Earth, which may have been the very heart of Lucifer's glorious dominion, the jewel in the crown of his cosmic empire, was now shattered. The ancient texts give us clues to the nature of this destruction. The prophet Jeremiah's vision of a world with ruined cities but no man, a sky with no light, and mountains that quaked, is a vision of this very moment. It is the forensic report from the crime scene of a fallen kingdom. The earth became tohu vabohu, formless and void, as a direct result of this judgment. The planet was thrown off its axis. Its geological stability was shattered, and a great global flood, the flood of Lucifer, not the flood of Noah, submerged the ruins of this fallen civilization under a blanket of darkness and water. The perfect world that the angels had once shouted for joy over was now a silent, watery grave, the tombstone of a failed rebellion. The first act of cosmic history had ended in ruin. The stage was now dark, waiting for a new act and a new actor. With this cosmic history now restored, we can finally return to the cryptic verses in the book of Ezekiel and decode them with a new and stunning clarity. The clues that were once shrouded in mystery now reveal themselves as the precise historical details of Lucifer's fallen empire. God's lament over the king of Tyre was never just about a human ruler. It was a divine audit of a cosmic corporation. Let us first re-examine the phrase, "By the abundance of your trading you became filled with violence." In the context we have now established, this trading was not the exchange of timber and purple dye. This was the commerce of the heavens. Lucifer's trade was in loyalties, in allegiances, in the peddling of divine secrets, and in the bartering of power. His violence was not the clash of swords, but the spiritual violence of deception, of tearing a third of the angels away from their Creator through a campaign of seductive lies and false promises. He was the ultimate insider trader, using his privileged position near the throne to build his own portfolio of power. Now consider the second, even more stunning clue. I laid you before kings that they might gaze at you. We can now see with certainty that these were not the human kings of Phoenicia. These were the other celestial rulers, the loyal angelic princes, the stars of God above whom Lucifer had sought to exalt his throne. His judgment was not a private affair. It was a public humiliation, a cosmic spectacle. He, the most beautiful and wise of all created beings, was cast down and made a cautionary tale before his peers, a demonstration to the entire universe that no amount of created glory could ever successfully challenge the uncreated source of that glory. The signs were always there in the text. We simply lacked the historical context to read them correctly. But the canonical text is not our only witness to this primordial angelic order. To fully corroborate the existence of Lucifer's structured, hierarchical kingdom, we must turn to the testimony of the forgotten witness, the Book of Enoch. This ancient text, preserved outside the mainstream canon, provides an unparalleled glimpse into the complex society of the heavens. It does not speak in veiled allegories. It speaks with the clarity of a heavenly court document. Enoch's visions do not depict a homogeneous mass of angels. Instead, they reveal a universe populated by distinct orders and classes of celestial beings, each with their own names, ranks, and responsibilities. He speaks of the cherubim, the seraphim, and the ophanim. He lists the names of the archangels who stand before the throne of God. He describes a universe administered by a complex bureaucracy of chiefs of the thousands, princes, and authorities. This is the very context in which Lucifer's cosmic trade empire operated. He was not a lone rebel in a simplistic world of good versus evil. He was the CEO of a vast interdimensional corporation, a prince among other princes, who used his position to create a hostile faction within a pre-existing celestial government. The Book of Enoch provides the organizational chart of the very kingdom that Lucifer attempted to fracture. It confirms that the kings Ezekiel spoke of were real, that the stars of God Isaiah mentioned were specific ranks of authority, and that Lucifer's rebellion was not a mythological fable, but a political and corporate mutiny that took place within a real, functioning, and highly complex angelic civilization. With the testimony of the forgotten witnesses now heard, the majestic opening of Genesis chapter 1 is transformed. It is no longer the story of a first creation out of nothing, but the story of a profound and deliberate recreation out of ruin. The 6 days of creation are not just a sequence of divine fiats. They are a strategic, 7-step process of reclaiming and restoring a planet that had been shattered by the judgment upon Lucifer's empire. This is the cosmic thread that connects the war in heaven to the world of man. Consider the sequence anew. When God's Spirit hovers over the face of the dark, chaotic waters, it is the act of a divine restorer surveying a desolate, post-war landscape. The command, "Let there be light," is not the ignition of the first photon in an empty universe. It is the reintroduction of divine light and order into a realm that had been plunged into darkness. It is God pushing back the spiritual and physical shadow of a fallen kingdom. The separation of the waters, the raising of the dry land, the forming of the atmosphere, each act is a reversal of the tohu vabohu, a methodical reconstruction of a habitable world from the wreckage of the old one. This is not creation. It is reclamation. And the ultimate act of this reclamation is the forming of Adam. He is not the first inhabitant of the planet. He is the first citizen of the new world order. He is the divinely appointed steward, the priest-king installed to govern a territory that had been liberated from its former rebellious tyrant. The Garden of Eden is his capital, the beachhead of heaven's new government on earth. The entire Genesis 1 narrative is not about a beginning, but a re-beginning, a divine and strategic response to the catastrophic end of the civilization that came before. The model of Lucifer's cosmic trade empire, a civilization built on commerce, pride, and the desire to be like the Most High, did not vanish when his kingdom was judged. The pattern, the very spiritual DNA of that rebellion, was merely suppressed, and it would re-emerge time and again in the human civilizations that followed. The most potent and explicit terrestrial echo of Lucifer's fallen kingdom is the Empire of Babylon. Consider the parallels. The story of Babylon, as told in Genesis chapter 11, begins on the plain of Shinar. It is a story of a unified humanity driven by a singular ambition to build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven in order to make a name for ourselves. This is the exact same prideful impulse that motivated Lucifer. It is the desire to achieve divine status through technology and collective will, to establish a man-made center of power that rivals the authority of God. Later, in the prophetic books, Babylon evolves into more than just a historical city. It becomes the ultimate symbol of the worldly system. The book of Revelation, chapter 18, describes Babylon the Great, not primarily as a military power, but as a global economic empire. The merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies, the text declares. Her sins are listed as pride, luxury, sorcery, and the trafficking not just of goods, but of the souls of men. This is a perfect earthly reflection of Lucifer's original cosmic trade empire. The currency may have changed from celestial glory to gold and silver, but the business model is identical, a system built on the acquisition of power, the glorification of self, and the commodification of all things, even life itself. Babylon, in both its historical and prophetic forms, is the recurring pattern, the human attempt to rebuild the very empire that God judged and cast down before Adam was ever made. This brings us to a crucial and unsettling question. If the story of Lucifer's pre-Adamic kingdom is so foundational, if it provides the essential context for the entire biblical narrative of redemption, why was it buried? Why would the ancient scribes and the later councils of the church choose to obscure this truth, leaving only cryptic clues in Ezekiel and Isaiah, while relegating the fuller accounts to the shadows of the forbidden texts? The answer, most likely, lies in a combination of theological caution and a desire for narrative simplicity. To present Lucifer merely as a fallen angel, a tempter who appears in a garden, is to create a manageable and morally clear villain. It places the primary responsibility for the fall squarely on the shoulders of humanity, making the story a straightforward drama of human choice and consequence. But to present Lucifer as the former emperor of a sophisticated cosmic civilization is to introduce a level of complexity that is profoundly unsettling. It suggests that evil is not just a moral failing, but an organized, corporate, and ancient political reality. It forces us to confront the fact that our world was born onto a pre-existing battlefield, and that the evil we face has a history, a structure, and a level of intelligence that far surpasses our own. This is not a comforting thought. It complicates the simple story of good versus evil and demands a far more sophisticated understanding of spiritual warfare. Furthermore, a full accounting of Lucifer's kingdom could have been seen as dangerous, potentially leading to a Gnostic-like dualism, where God and Lucifer are viewed as two competing cosmic powers. The gatekeepers of Scripture, in their desire to protect the absolute sovereignty and uniqueness of Yahweh, likely chose to redact the story. They opted to present a simplified narrative that, while theologically safer, sacrificed the profound and terrifying depth of the original account. It was a choice to bury a difficult cosmic truth in favor of a more manageable moral lesson. This ancient pattern, the spiritual DNA of Lucifer's cosmic trade empire, has not been confined to the pre-Adamic world or the historical city of Babylon. Its echo reverberates with a terrifying clarity in the very structure of our modern global civilization. The same operating system of pride, commerce, and self-deification is at work today, now on a scale that its ancient counterparts could only have dreamed of. Consider the world system in which we live. It is a vast, interconnected network built fundamentally on the principle of commerce. Nations are judged not by their righteousness, but by their GDP. Human value is often measured not by character, but by productivity and purchasing power. It is a system that promises salvation through technology, fulfillment through acquisition, and identity through branding. It demands our allegiance, our time, and our worship, offering us a kingdom of comfort and convenience in exchange for our souls. This is not to say that commerce or technology are inherently evil, but when a system is built upon the foundational belief that humanity can achieve paradise for itself without God, when the pursuit of profit becomes the ultimate good and the self becomes the ultimate God, it is a direct, modern reflection of the very rebellion that began with the anointed cherub in the heavenly Eden. The spirit of the cosmic trade empire is alive and well. It operates in our stock markets, in our media, in our political ideologies, and even, at times, within the compromised structures of our religious institutions. It is the air we breathe, the water we swim in, the great glittering Babylon that promises everything and demands nothing less than our total allegiance. And so, this ancient cosmic story ceases to be a distant history and becomes a piercing, personal question. It holds up a sacred mirror to our own lives and asks a single, sobering question. In which economy are you participating? What is the true currency of your life? In Lucifer's cosmic trade empire and in its earthly reflection in Babylon, the currency is clear. It is power, prestige, beauty, wealth, and influence. It is the currency of self. Life in this system is a relentless process of acquisition, acquiring more status, more possessions, more control. It is a transactional existence where relationships are measured by their utility and worship is directed toward the idol of personal achievement. Every day, this system presents us with 1,000 opportunities to trade a piece of our soul for a temporary gain, a moment of glory, a fleeting sense of security. But there is another economy. It is the economy of the kingdom of God, and its currency is the exact opposite. Its currency is humility, service, sacrifice, and love. In this kingdom, value is not determined by what you acquire, but by what you give away. Power is not found in exalting yourself, but in humbling yourself. And the greatest are not those who are served, but those who serve. Every day, this kingdom also presents us with 1,000 opportunities to forgive an offense, to serve someone in secret, to choose integrity over profit, to surrender our own will to a higher one. Each day, you are making a transaction. Every choice, every word, every dollar you spend, every hour you invest is a form of trade. You are either investing in the fleeting, self-serving economy of Babylon, or you are investing in the eternal, unshakable economy of heaven. The story of Lucifer's empire is a warning. It is a call to audit your own life, to examine your own heart, and to ask yourself honestly, what is the currency that truly governs me? To know this, to understand the spiritual architecture of the world system in which you live, is to arrive at an unavoidable crossroads of choice. You cannot unknow this truth. You can no longer participate in the economy of Babylon with a clear conscience, pretending that it is a neutral system. The knowledge of its origin, its nature, and its ultimate destiny comes with a profound and personal responsibility. The Book of Revelation issues this very call in its 18th chapter, as the final judgment upon Babylon the Great is about to fall. A voice from heaven cries out, "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues." This is not a call to physically retreat from the world, to hide in a remote compound. It is a call to a radical, spiritual, and ethical withdrawal. It is a summons to disentangle your heart, your allegiance, and your ultimate hope from a system that is destined for judgment. To come out of Babylon is to consciously reject its currency. It is to refuse to play the game of self-exaltation. It is to make deliberate choices in your career, in your finances, in your relationships, in your entertainment, that prioritize the values of the kingdom of God over the values of the cosmic trade empire. This is not an easy path. It is often a path of obscurity, of financial sacrifice, of being misunderstood by a world that cannot comprehend why you would trade its glittering prizes for an unseen, eternal reward. You now stand at that crossroads. You have seen the blueprint of the two systems. One is a sprawling, powerful, and seductive empire that promises the world but costs the soul. The other is a quiet, often hidden kingdom that promises nothing the world values, but offers everything that eternity holds. The choice is not a one-time decision, but a daily realignment of your will. To know this is to be without excuse. You must choose which empire you will serve. The excavation of Lucifer's forgotten empire has only just begun. What we have uncovered today is not a final conclusion, but an opening statement in a much larger investigation. The evidence presented, from the cryptic verses of the prophets to the corroborating testimony of the forbidden scrolls, is not meant to end the conversation. It is meant to begin it. If you are a seeker of the uncensored truth, a spiritual archaeologist unafraid to dig where others have forbidden, then this channel is not just a source of information, it is your community. It is a gathering place for the narrative detectives, for those who are no longer satisfied with the simplified stories and are willing to face the profound and often terrifying complexity of the cosmic war. Our journey of discovery is an ongoing one. The story does not end here. Share what you have discovered in the comments below. What echoes of this cosmic trade empire do you see in the world around you? Your insights, your questions, and your own research are a vital part of this collective effort to restore the truths that have been buried. And be ready, for there are other lost dossiers, other forgotten histories, and other silenced witnesses waiting in the archives to be unsealed. The investigation continues, and we invite you to be a part of it.